Welcome back to another discussion of Azernak's book, The Perpetual Wound. We're going to start in talking about the discussion that we had about the homework assignment for paragraph 3 and 4 of Azernak's book. But before we do, I have a confession to make. I really had a hard time putting these videos together for this time because we had such a great discussion around the book, and really, it really exposed some very fundamental confusions that I had, both about Azernak's book and about some of the surrounding philosophical issues. So here's how I'm going to approach the whole thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to devote this video that we have now to discussing some of the confusions that I had about Azernak's book and about the surrounding philosophical issues. And then next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce some more vocabulary. And then finally, the video after that, what I will do is we'll actually start talking about the discussion that we had. So as you can see, there's a lot of ground to cover, and let's get right to it. So on to the confusions that I had. So I'm indebted to Caro for clearing up this confusion for me, and also to Scientific Discussion. If you remember Scientific Discussion's last video, he made a very good point. If there is some acceptance, there's somebody who's doing the accepting. And accepting or acceptability always implies a subject who is doing it. And the terminology propositional attitude implies there is somebody who has that propositional attitude. So I was using the word true in a very sloppy sense here. I was calling it a propositional attitude. Really, true isn't a propositional attitude because there's nobody who, it's true for, right? I mean, you might think of like God or something, or, some Spinozistic or Berkeleyan conception where that's the case. But really, true doesn't really imply that there's a subject that it's true for. So it's not a propositional attitude. So a big thank you goes out to Caro for clearing up this confusion for me. Okay, confusion number 2, acceptable versus accept. Now, I realized this when reading Savage Mike Knighty's solution to the homework and a lot of other people's solution to the homework. Sometimes just didn't seem that we were in sync or on the same page at all. But then I realized I was crucially confusing two different propositional attitudes. The propositional attitude of finding something acceptable and the propositional attitude of accepting something. And I tried to trace back the source of this confusion, and I realized that Azernak has snuck in a fast one on us. Back to the first sentence of the paragraph that we were discussing. He says, if whatever we care to accept is acceptable, then why does it matter what we accept or why we accept it? See, he's talking about two different kinds of propositional attitudes here. Acceptable and accepting. And we actually need to distinguish these two propositional attitudes one from the other. Now you might be wondering, what exactly is the difference between acceptable and accept? Well, I'd like to approach this by contrasting, first of all, as I always do, believing with accepting. So you can believe X without accepting X. For example, I believe racism exists, but I don't accept it or find it acceptable. But can you accept X without believing it? Well, try this sentence on for size. I accept that Santa Claus came to my house and gave me lots of toys. No, I don't think you can really, accept that sentence without also believing it. But, clarify this for me, guys. What do you think about that? Can you accept something without actually believing it? I do, however, think you can find X acceptable without accepting it. So, for example, I find it quite acceptable that Santa Claus would come to my house and give me lots of toys, but I don't accept that he did. Or, for example, I would find it very acceptable to be a millionaire, but I can't really accept being a millionaire because I'm not a millionaire. So as you can see, it's very important to distinguish very carefully between these two propositional attitudes, being acceptable or actually accepting. Now, what does this have to do with the homework? Well, it's very interesting. About half of you answered this question. Can you give an example of where something's being acceptable or unacceptable will determine whether something else is true or false? And about half of you answered this question, the same question as above, but with acceptable and unacceptable, replaced by accepted and unaccepted. And as you can see, because acceptable and accepted are two different propositional attitudes, these are actually two different questions. And so this was really causing some confusion in my mind. But the thing is, it's not really, the source of the confusion is Azrina really has switched topics on us, as it were. He's gone from talking about acceptable to actually accepting and accepted. And this is something that flew right in under my nose, unnoticed. So as you can see, this series of discussions on Azure Knight's book, it really is, performing exactly the service for me that I wanted it to perform. I wanted to get clear about some of these issues. I wanted to really understand what was going on, and I wanted to clarify to myself what was happening. And I hope it's doing the same service for you. So now that we have these clarifications out of the way, next video we'll move on. I'll introduce some vocabulary, and then we'll talk about the rest of the homework assignments. See you then.